I've never thought that I meet the living legend himself, what I consider to be the greatest living magician of today, the one and only Harry Lorayne. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those flattering words. Can I quote you?
Why don't we just talk about you and exactly your history a little bit, if we may?
Okay. You know, it's an interesting story. I've been very fortunate in my life, but not at the beginning. I was born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was, I didn't know the word in those days, but it was a ghetto. I mean, really a ghetto. But you know, Armando, you got to understand that there was no television in those days. You know, remember, again, I'm 95 years old. When I was a kid, there was no television. So I thought that the whole world was that way. It was terrible. I mean, it really terrible. And my parents were what I call professional poor people. You know, it was a very poor neighborhood, but my parents, I won't go into that. Anyway, I've had a pretty bad upbringing. Like, I'll give you an example. I didn't know about brushing my teeth till I was in my mid-teens, which has cost me, I get very emotional when I start to talk about this. It has cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars for my teeth because I didn't know how to brush I never knew about brushing my teeth. That's my parents' story. Anyway, aside from that, I was the shyest kid in the world. Now, when I say the shyest kid, I'm not exaggerating. Shy to the point that when I was in my very early grades in school, you know, as a kid, kindergarten, whatever, or what they called 1A, I was too shy to raise my hand when I had to go to the bathroom. I don't have to tell you the end result of that. I mean, I was that shy, okay? I never made eye contact with anybody. I never spoke to anybody unless they spoke to me. That's how shy I was, to the point of sickness. Now, there was a park within walking distance of my house on the Lower East Side called Pitt Street Park. Of course, it was on Pitt Street. Technical name was the Hamilton Fish Park. Anyway, I would go there after school almost every day because there was a counselor there who taught the kids outdoor sports like paddle tennis, shuffleboard, because there was a whole shuffleboard thing on the floor, on the concrete, and table tennis, you know, things like that. And I went there quite often. Never talked to anybody because of my shyness again, but I went there and I practiced shuffleboard and paddle tennis, etc. One day, and talk about pivot points, you know, life-changing things. A storm happens, a terrible rainstorm, and the counselor rushes us into an enclosure, a room. And it seemed he didn't know what to do with us inside. You know, he was good at teaching us shuffleboard and ping pong and things like that, but he didn't know what to do with us inside. You know what he did? He did a card trick. Well, when I saw that card trick, I started to say to myself, oh my God, if only I could do that. If only I could do that. And I was too shy to ask him how he did it, not realizing that you don't ask a magician how he did a trick. He's not going to tell you anyway, right? But I didn't know that at that time. So I was too shy anyway to ask. What I did, God, you know, I tell these stories and it brings back these memories from 100 years ago. It's a little difficult for me. I lived in a tenement, a 5-story walk-up tenement that I had to walk up 5 flights up and down to go there. In those days, people used to put out empty milk bottles, and when the milkman came, he would take the empty milk bottles and put down full milk bottles. I don't know how the people paid for that. That's kind of vague in my mind, but that's what I used to see always. As I walked up to my apartment, I'd see empty milk bottles. The reason I'm telling you this, I needed to buy a deck of cards, although I had no money. So I found out that a deck of cards in those days, the cheapest deck was 18 cents. I stole, I think enough decades have gone by, so I can't be arrested for this now. I stole 9 milk bottles, okay? And I got 2 pennies per bundle, so that I could buy the deck of cards. That's what happened. Again, long story short, I bought a deck of cards and I started to try to figure out the trick that the counselor had shown. I came up with 4 different ways to do it. One of them even better than what he did, at least I thought so, okay? Now, when I wrote about this originally, which I did in my memoir, Before I Forget, it's called. Mel Brooks told me to call it a re-memoir because I remembered. Anyway, it says that on the cover of the book. Mel Brooks says to call it a re-memoir, but the title is Before I Forget. And I wrote that for the public, not just for magicians, okay? And it's been said, I'm not going mentally. My books have sold millions of copies, and this is one of them, because people think, I go off on tangents sometime, Armando, but I'm pretty good at remembering to come back, okay? And I'm about to say, when I talked about how fortunate I am, I have a half term of high school. That's it. I have no education. And people think I'm one of the best writers in the business, which is, talk about God giving you something. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but I'm a pretty good writer. But I did my first few books. The publisher, his name was Frederick Fell, he published my first book, How to Develop a Superpower Memory. For God's sakes, that's 1956, And then he published the next one. Well, when I did the next one, he said, Harry, you are a much better editor than my editor, the people I pay. Edit your own books. Think about that. A kid with only a half term of high school, that was a better editor than the editor he was paying. I don't know how much money. And that's been happening ever since. None of my publishers now need editors. I edit my own books. You know why? I edit it better than the editor does. And I'm not saying that just, to brag. It's true.
Mhm.
If the editor could do it better, great, but they can't. They really can't. I'll give you a good example. They don't know my sense of humor, or they don't know any sense of humor. In my second book, Secrets of Mind Power, I talked about a lot of different things, not memory, but there's one section on memory. And at the end of that section, I said 3 things. 1, I think you should buy How to Develop a Super Memory because it'll train your memory. Number 2, I think you'll enjoy my writing. Number 3, I need the money. See, now it's interesting. You just left.
Mhm.
And that's why I wrote it that way. I said it for a joke. The editor changed it. The editor made the last line say, but something, I really could use the money. He made it sound like I really meant it. This is an editor. When I saw that, I screamed at the publisher. I said, don't put that in there. That's not what I meant. I'm making a joke. The editor didn't understand that. Okay, so I'm telling you why I became an editor of my own books. Now, we're talking about me working out 4 ways of doing that card trick I had seen the counselor do. But you know what happened? As I started to say, when I wrote about this, I said, the cliche is, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? The reason I wrote that, I said, look, if you know a great trick, but you never show it to anybody, is it a great trick? I mean, what's the point, right? Well, when I talk about a pivot point, Armando, a change of life point, I had to do something where it wasn't a tree falling on the ground that nobody could hear it. I could do this great trick. I got to show it to somebody, otherwise it's not a trick. It's not magic. So for the first time in my life, I was maybe 11 years old. I had to make eye contact. I had to say 3 words to somebody. I had to say, pick a card. Otherwise, how am I going to do the darn trick? That's what happened. I did this trick that I had come up with for somebody, saying, pick a card. A friend on the sidewalks of New York. I did the trick. He told another friend about it. That friend asked me to do the trick. I did. Before you know it, there's a bunch of kids asking me, hey, Magish. They used to call me Magish. Hey, Magish, show me that trick. Then what started to happen And again, talk about a pivot point. They say, hey, magician, can you show me a different trick? I didn't know a different trick. That's the only trick I knew. It forced me to go to the library, which is also near the Pittsburgh Park, to see if they had any magic books. They did, maybe 6 books or something like that on magic. The problem, Armando, in those days, and again, I'm going back, decades, the books on magic were on tricks with ropes or handkerchiefs or nails, things which I didn't care about. All I was interested in was cards. When I found a magic book that had maybe 1 chapter or 1 trick on cards, oh, I smelled the page. It was great. I clutched it to my chest. I checked it out. I ran home with it, etc. And I started to learn a few different tricks that way. I started, this is something a lot of magicians, when I tell it to them, they're very surprised. Till I was in my very late teens, when I came out of the Army, which is another story. I was like 18 and a half years old when I got out. Of course, I had, I went into the Army at 17 and a half because I knew I was going to be drafted anyway. So I went and I joined the Army. I came out, that's another story, which I won't go into, but I came out at about 18 and a half. And that's the first time, Armando, that I ever heard about magic shops. I never knew about magic shops. I heard about Tannins and Holdens and Abbots. I never knew about those things. I had devised my own tricks. And the point is, I never knew about the old books. I can't even think of their names. What are the names of some of the old magic books that people now talk about? I can't even think of them because I never read them. Wow. I was more interested in any modern magic books. And I found out as years went by that a lot of the tricks in those books were fine for basics, Royal Road to card magic, books like that. Mm-hmm. But the tricks that I was coming up with were much better modernly, Anyway, I started to go up to the magic shops. And that became somebody once wrote, Armando, that it's very hard to start Harry Lorayne, but it's much, much harder to stop him. So I think I'm telling you too much about how I actually got into card magic. That was a change of life for me. It took me out of that cage of shyness. That's the key. Because when I say I was shy to the point of sickness, I'm not making that up. It was a sickness. I got it from my mother. It's a long story, but I overcompensated. When I tell people now that I was a shy kid, they don't believe it because I sure as heck ain't shy anymore. I mean, come on, I get out on stage and talk to thousands of people. So thank God I got over I overcompensated, but I'm not shy anymore. All right.
Brief question, Harry. How did you decide to write your first book on memory? Because that's a very interesting.
Okay, that's another story. I was on. What was happening? Somebody asked me. I think it was Johnny Carson. I should mention this while I think of it. If you're going to let your people see this, if you're recording it,
yes,
there are 2 sites that my daughter-in-law, her name is Elizabeth, married to my son Robert, who put up 2 sites of mine. She took an old one and changed it, and she's very good at it. And I'm going to mention it, then I'll tell you why. There are 2 sites. One is Harry, you got to spell my last name right, of course. At least I think so. I told you I'm a terrible computer person. You got to go to harrylorraynemagic.com. That takes you, excuse me, I got blow my nose. I'm sorry. harrylorraynemagic.com takes you to my magic site. People have told me that they have spent 2 or 3 hours there just being entertained because there are videos there. If you click on videos, there are interviews. There's a video of my 90th birthday party with people who couldn't make the party, sent videos. And I'm talking about people like Mel Brooks, Alan Alda, Dick Cavett, Penn and Teller, David Copperfield, Darwin Ortiz. I mean, all the people in magic that are so interesting. So you can enter. You want to order something? Wonderful. But I'm not telling you for that. I'm telling you can be entertained. So that's HarryLorayneMagic.com. The other one, and she did a fantastic site here, is about because she asked me about memory. This is about my memory power course, which they are redoing. They've taken over all for me because of my age, I mean, they obviously now can handle it better. Making sales, mailing books. I can't go to the post office anymore. I don't have a driver's license anymore at my age, things like that. So they're handling all that for me. So the second site is just HarryLorayne.com. Leave out the word magic, HarryLorayne.com. And it's about my mind power course. And I got to tell you, she found things of mine that I had forgotten about. Wow. There's a thing, it says that you can click on vintage appearances. And there are appearances that I did on TV. I said, help me, I forgot about them. One with on the Merv Griffin show, one with Paul Daniels in England. I did them so long, I forgot about them. I was young and good looking. I had black hair, a long time ago. But there are things that you will be entertained. That's the point. There's a letter from Anne Bancroft who said how she used my systems to remember the scripts of plays that she had to do and movies and, things like that. And there's scenes from from one of my television infomercials that Dick Cavett hosted. Dick Cavett hosted one of my TV infomercials. I had two of them for the Memory Power course. The first one, a different company did, and it was a 60-40 deal. I was getting 60%, they were getting 40%, okay? And there's a company called J.D. Powers that tells you about the important infomercials. I was the #1 infomercial with that for months. I don't know how long. Anyway, that stopped. And months later, I did a second infomercial, but I did it myself so that I owned 100% of it. But the host of it was Dick Cavett, who was using my systems and became a friend of mine. And at that point was very well known. I don't know how well known he is now, but he was a star person at his own television show, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that, my deal with him was to give him $1 for every unit sold. Mm-hmm. You ready for this? He made $250,000.
Oh my God.
Okay. So, I mean, he was happy to do the infomercial. And I was happy to give him $1 a bet. Come on, I'd give him $1. I
mean, you did very
well. Okay. So, I'm knocking wood mentally because of these things, obviously. Mm-hmm. My first book, How to Develop a Superpower Memory, has sold 11 million copies before I started to write new books on the subject. Mm-hmm. Now, you asked me, I told you about me going off on tangents, but I usually remember to come back. You asked me, what made me write my first memory book? How did that come about? Johnny Carson asked me on one of the shows. Incidentally, if you go to any of these websites that I mentioned, there are videos you can see. One of them is my last or next to last appearance on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, okay? He became a friend. I did it 24 times, okay? So anyway, what was happening? Johnny asked me, Harry, how does a D's, Dems, and Does kid from the Lower East Side with no education, no money, etc., become the world's foremost memory training specialist? Which is what Time Magazine called me. They also called me the Yoda of memory training. I didn't know what the heck the word Yoda meant. I thought it was an insult at first. Then I found out it was a compliment, the Yoda of memory training. So when he asked me this question, here's the point. I said, stomach cramps. Oh, he said, what? He turned white under his makeup. He thought I lost my mind. I said, no, I'll explain it. And I started to explain it. And this is the point. I was very young. I was getting, there was a teacher by the name of Mrs. Goldfisher.
Mm.
I will never forget her. She gave us a test every day. And we used to take a yellow rectangular piece of paper, number it from 1 to 10. And she would ask 10 questions, either about things she spoke about in the classroom or that we read in the book on pages she told us to read, okay? The point is she would grade them all, and then we would have to take them home for at least one parent to sign. I was getting grades like 40 or 50. My classmates were getting passing grades, 70, 80, 90, whatever. I was dyslexic. I never heard that word when I was a kid. I don't know if the teachers heard that word or knew about it. I wrote once that, you're given the name, you play the game. I was stamped moron because of these grades I was getting, so I thought I was a moron. But the point is, I would bring these tests home every day, and the person who signed it was my father, who died when I was 12, so you can see how far back I'm going. He would look at that grade. Now, here's another point to the story. He would punch me.
Oh my gosh.
I said this on the Johnny Carson show, using that word. He punched me. About 5 weeks later, 3 weeks later, don't forget, we didn't have email then. It was all snail mail. Freddie DeCordova, who was the producer of the Tonight Show, called me, and he said, "Oh, Harry, we've got 8,000 pieces of mail about you." I said, "Great." He said, "No, they're all negative." I said, "Negative? What did I do?" He said, "They all are talking about the same thing. The fact that you said your father punched you. That, for some reason, turned people." They said, "What? You can't say that." Now I thought, I know, was that a dirty word in those years? I don't know. I guess so, because now when I tell the story, even to this day, I don't say he punched me. I say he punished me. That's okay. But it seemed he punched me. So I started to say he punished me. But now, why am I telling you this story? When I said the stomach cramps, he would punch me or punish me whenever I brought home these damn failing grade tests. Okay, that's what gave me stomach cramps. You know how I realized the importance? I realized I was getting those stomach cramps only Monday through Friday, school days. I didn't get them on Saturdays and Sundays because I was afraid of my father punching me. That gave me stomach cramps. So now, talk about pivot points. I'm walking to school. Those days we walked to school, PS 188. I'll never forget it. Off the East River. I'm a dead-end kid, right off the East River. I lived right off the East River, this ghetto. Anyway, I'm walking to school, and a light bulb goes off in my head. I stop. How can I stop my father from punching me so I don't have these stomach cramps? So I answered my own question. I said, well, don't get failing grades on your damn tests. I took another few steps and said, oh, wonderful, Harry. Thanks for telling me that. How do I do that? Very simple. I took another 2 steps. How? Remember the answers to the darn questions. I'm telling you, the things that really were going through my mind at 11 and a half, 12 years, whatever. I take another few steps and I say, okay, how can I learn to remember the answers to these darn questions? Not because I give a darn about passing the test, but I got to pass them so my father doesn't hit me so I don't get stomach cramps. Okay, the answer to your question, I go to the library. I can still visualize the Italian lady, spoke with an Italian accent, gray-haired, with a bun and a black dress. And I said, I got to learn how to remember on the ready. She said, come with me. She takes me to a room in the corner, I swear to you, covered with cobwebs and dust. Nobody's been in there for God knows how long. She cleans it up. She takes me in. She points to a corner. She says, there are some books on memory training there. Sure enough, I go in there and I spent, she kept looking in to see if I was okay because there were no chairs there. And I was standing for 2 hours going through these maybe 4 or 5 books. But you got to remember, they were written centuries ago, 16th century, a few of those, which I now have in my basement. I own those books. But don't forget, I'm 11 and a half years old or something like that, and I'm reading language from centuries ago. I couldn't make out most of it, and a lot of the training talks they were talking about didn't make sense to me. But here's the point: the 0.9999 forever that did make some sense, that I understood a little bit, changed my life, because what I started to do was change them to fit my problem. I didn't realize that I was inventing things. I didn't realize that. All I cared about was being able to remember the damn answers to the questions that Mrs. Goldfisher was asking. So I did that. Now, end the story. I start getting hundreds on the tests.
Wow.
One day I'm walking into the classroom before the class starts, and Mrs. Goldfish is sitting at a desk. She says, "Harry, come here. What's happening? You're getting 100 on your test now, which I thought you always should get, but now all of a sudden you get it. What happened?" I said, "Well, I trained my memory to remember the answers to your questions." She said, what are you talking about? I started to explain. She said, "Tell me what you do." I said, "Well, what are the questions you asked?" And I remember this so clearly because this is the example I used. One of the questions you asked is, "What's the capital of Maryland?" Well, the capital of Maryland is Annapolis. I had never even heard that name before at that time. How did I remember that Annapolis is the capital of Maryland? Most people, even to this day, say Baltimore, but it's Annapolis, it's the capital of Maryland. So I started to explain it to Mrs. Goldfisher. I pointed to a kid in the class, a little girl. Her name was Mary. I said, "I visualized Mary, and I saw an apple is landing on her head. An apple is landing on Mary's head. Mary landing, Mary land. An apple is an apple." As I'm telling this to Mrs. Goldfisher, I see her eyes cloud over. She says, "Okay, Harry, take your seat." She thought I was crazy. Okay, I say to myself as I'm taking my seat, people are going to think I'm crazy. I'll keep this to myself. But what started to happen is my classmates would say, "Hey, Harry, what the hell are you doing? Tell me, can I do it for this fact? Can I do it for..." And I started to teach it to my classmates, and they started to use it. So that I saw the value of it. Even the stupid Mrs. Goldfish thought I was nuts. Right? Wow. I mean, here's a teacher. She thinks I'm crazy. And I'm getting hundreds, for God's sakes. There's got to be something there. Anyway, that's the story. Wow. So that's what started my interest in memory. And, I wrote my first book in 1956. But what happened, I'll tell you another story. That's the memory book that came out in 1973, yes. Right? That's still, knock wood, it's selling like crazy. And the book I wrote after that is called Ageless Memory, which I explain, and I told my son and sister-in-law when they run advertisements for it, they say so. It's the same systems that I teach in all my books, but they're geared more in ageless memory. I originally titled it the Over 40 Memory Book. The publisher changed it to Ageless Memory. The point is, I'm teaching the same systems, but geared toward older people. That I watch the darn medicine that I'm taking, so I remember its name. That I remember to take my medicine today. Things for older people. But still things that anybody can use. With a little twist here and there, you apply it to anything. So anyway, the memory book, I'll tell you how the memory book started. Not the memory book. The first one, how to develop a superpower memory. My wife and I, she passed away quite some time ago. We were married for 70 years. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's age. I start to talk about these things and I start to choke up. Anyway, when we were doing the act, I wrote a thing called the Memory Aid course. It was 10 lessons, which I typed myself, etc., and I put it in the envelope and sent it back and said Memory Aid course. I sold it for $10. It got to the point where after a while I was making more, because before I said goodnight, I'd show it, mention it, and then after the show, sometimes I'd make more money selling these things than I did with the money I was being paid, So anyway, long story short, one day somebody, this was at Brown's Hotel, these pivot points are hard to forget. You don't have to be a memory expert because they're life-changing. A man approaches me at Brown's Hotel, that's in the Catskill area, New York State, and he says, Mr. Lorayne, can you teach some of the things I saw you do on stage, which are, remembering 400 people's names and the copy of Time magazine that just came out yesterday, and blah, blah, blah. Can you teach that to other people? I said, well, yeah, I taught in this course. He said, can you give me 2 chapters? I said, here, take the whole thing. Again, long story short, it ends up he was a literary agent.
Oh.
He takes this home. His name was Martin something, big memory expert here. I can't think of his last name. Anyway, he calls me. He says, are you free tomorrow for lunch? Yeah, I want you to meet Frederick Fell. Frederick Fell was the owner of Frederick Fell Incorporated, an office on Park Avenue in New York City. We have lunch. Again, long story short, he wants me to do a book on memory, how to remember. And he gave me the title, how to develop a superpower memory. He gave me a $500 advance. I was scared. I thought that if he didn't make back that $500, I would have to give it back. I was that naive, stupid. I didn't know. I was a young, naive guy. Anyway, he gives it the title. He prints the book. There was a guy by the name of Gene Schwartz, who passed away a long time ago, who wrote a 3,000-word ad for the book. I gave him the top line, the heading. Give me one evening, and I'll give you a push-button memory. I wrote the heading. He wrote 3,000 words, which started to appear. You ready for this? Every magazine in America that had over 5,000 circulation, and the same for every magazine in different languages all over the world. The book started to sell millions of copies. Of course, they were selling for $2.95 at that point. And you want to know the real wonderful part of the story? I was getting a penny a book.
Oh.
A penny a book.
Wow.
My wife, Renee, started to scream at me, get a lawyer. I got a lawyer. It ended up, we doubled it. I got 2 pennies a book.
Oh.
Okay. But I learned. I made it quite a bit of money. I learned from these experiences because, like I said, I was a stupid little kid with no education. But thank God, I keep thanking God for giving me some intelligence to understand some of these things, and also how to be a darn good writer. Dick Cavett said to me, you are the best expository writer I ever met. To teach things and write, blah, 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 and hold my interest, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that became my first book on memory, and what's interesting, my second book for Frederick Fell, he published 2 books for me. Of course, with the second one was a little different with the advance. That went into many thousands of dollars. But he said to me one day at lunch, we became friendly. He said, Harry, you got to do another book. Of course, I realized that the only reason a publisher is going to say you got to do another book is because he's making a hell of a lot of money for the first book. Otherwise, right? Why would he want to do another book? So I said, but Fred, I've said everything I got to say. I really thought I had said everything I got to say in the first book. He said, no, you can. Another pivot point. He picks up a napkin and he starts to write chapter headings. How to get rid of bad memories. Not bad, how to get rid of bad habits. How to develop good habits. How to get rid of fear. He writes chapter headings on subjects I didn't know anything about. Well, I take home the napkin, I do some research. I find a book that talks about all these subjects, and I'm the kind of guy, I make up my own things, the things that worked for me growing up, worked for me in my life. So I took these chapter headings. I said what this guy said, but then I wrote my thoughts on it. That book became Secrets of Mind Power. And people, very well-known actors, somebody told me keep it on their night table just to read my book. Of course, I always say either keeping it there to learn or to put themselves to sleep. I don't know, why they're doing it, but that's what happened. Penn and Teller told me that. Anyway, that was my second book, Secrets of Mind Power, still out there, the first two books that I did for Frederick Fell. And that started a career. You know what happened? Yeah. This is interesting. My next to last book, I was going to say my last book, but I wrote a book. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh.
It's called More Jaw Droppers. I wrote this after what I thought was going to be my last book, which is called And Finally. That's what I meant, my last book, and exclamation point. One day before the pandemic, so I have a friend, a magic friend or two sitting here, and one guy says to me, Harry, how many books have you written, for God's sakes? I said, you know something? I never counted them. I have a general idea, but I don't think I ever counted them. But you know what? Here's my book, And Finally, which has just come out. And in the front of most every book, at least every book of mine, it says books by Harry Lorayne. And it lists all the books. So I said, you want to count them? Count them. You want to answer? He takes the book. Now, you ready for this? Why I remember it, why it became important? He counts the whole list of books on memory, which were listed first, and then the books on magic. He counts them all. You ready for this? 52. A deck of cards. That's why I remember it. I wrote 52 books. Of course, now I've written 53. And my son and daughter-in-law have another book that maybe they're holding to put out after I fall off a cliff. I don't know. But there's another one that they titled Essential Harry Lorayne by Harry Lorayne. But this one is already out. And those, website titles I mentioned before, when you go to harrylorrainemagic.com, you see a big ad for this book. And one of the things I taught, I'm going to show you something. Can you see my hands?
Yes.
Look, this is cards from 1 to King of Clubs. I have come up, let me brag a little bit. I have come up with some wonderful, at least I think some of the magicians all over the world have told me this, some wonderful utility items, items that you can use with cards. So many tricks in all my books, right? Is that Afterthoughts?
Yes, it is.
What I teach in there is a move people have raved about for years called the Ultra Move, which unfortunately I can't do anymore because of my damn arthritis and my thumb.
Yeah.
Anyway, utility moves that I've come up with: the spread control, the angle spread, the status quo shuffle, the universal reversal. They're all good utility moves that I use all the time.
When we say utility, what do we mean, Harry? Just follow
that you can do for a lot of different tricks.
Okay.
In other words, it's not a move that you can do only for one trick that you do. But that's what the utility makes it. That's why I called it utility. Every trick I do, where there's a packet involved, I use the utility mixer to shuffle them. Always. When I was doing 3-card Monte, I shuffled the 3 aces like I showed you before. I used it in practically every trick I did. Not everyone. I just ordered a 1-eye jack sandwich that I showed you before. There was no use for that utility mixer there. But for a lot of other tricks, yes. I'm doing a poker deal. I want to lose the aces. I mix them in. It fits into so many tricks. That's why it's called utility. And that is the best utility move I've ever come up with. Take Steve Cohen's remark. Wow, I'll use that for the rest of my life. And he does. Yeah. He uses it all the time. Okay. So I've come up, I'm very pleased. I'm very proud. I've come up with a lot of these things. My again, I go off on tangents. I mentioned my spread control. When I got out of the army, I told you before, I didn't know about magic shops. When I learned about them, I started to go up to Tannen's on Saturdays. What I don't know if you know Tannen's in those days. I don't know how it is now. You would take the elevator to his floor, and when the elevator door opened, you were there. You're not in the hallway. You were in Tannen's, okay? And I used to go in, there was a crowd of people. There were very little places to sit. Most people were standing, people at the counter buying things, or Jimmy Herpick was behind. He worked for Lieutenant doing tricks, trying to sell a magic deck or whatever. Okay, when I started to go up there, to my right, how can you forget these things? There were three people that I recognized because I had read about them and seen pictures of them. Dai Vernon, John Scarne, and the third one you probably wouldn't know, S. Leo Horowitz was his name.
Oh, wow.
He was a friend of theirs, but the ones I recognized, John Scarne and Dai Vernon. I wrote about this and I called them the triumvirate because when I got out and I recognized them, I wanted to meet these people. I would take a step toward them. And as I took a step toward them, they all together would take a step away from me, like ballet dancers, As I started to call them the triumvirate. They didn't want this kid, B, to bother them, okay? Okay, now why am I telling you this? I tried this 3 or 4 or 5 Saturdays. They always stepped away from me. Finally, I gave up, okay? There was a magician at that time called Louis Zingoni.
Oh.
Zingone, I think, but he pronounced it Zingoni. He came up with a thing called the Zingoni spread. Now, remember the triumvirate, John Scarne, Dai Vernon, and Leo Horowitz. Okay, I stopped trying to go to them. I didn't want them seeing their ballet again when they were stepped away from me. I'm at the glass counter at Tannen's, and I'm doing the spread control for a few young people, about my age. All of a sudden, I hear a voice behind me saying, "Hey, kid, do that again." It was John Scarne.
Oh.
He saw me do the spread control where there were 3 cards I shuffle and they're on top. He said, "Do that again." Oh, wow, I start to shake. It's John Scarne. I do it. He turns around and he says, Sam, that's S. Leo Horowitz. His name was Sam. Said, Sam, come over here. Watch this kid do the Zingoni spread. He thought I'm doing the Zingoni spread. And I'm doing an overhand shuffle, but I ain't peeling cards, counting them, In other words, it's really much better than the Zingoni spread, So they come over and I do it, and they say, "Do it again," and I do it again. I fooled John Scarne and Dai Vernon, for God's sakes. The next Saturday, listen to this. Again, talk about life-changing, right? The next Saturday, the elevator doors open at Tannen's. I see John Scarne, Dai Vernon, and S. Leo Horowitz. I take a step toward them, and they don't step away. They let me walk over to them, and they say, "Hey, kid," and John gives me that card. He says, "Do another trick for us." All of a sudden, I became part of that kind of group. That, again, talk about life-changing. John Scarne and Dai Vernon and I became good friends. S. Leo Horowitz I knew, but not in the same category as John and Dai. I spent so many hours, weeks, days, months, years with them.
May I try to demonstrate the spread control, Harry, if I may just see my...
Do you know what I'm talking about?
This is what I'm envisioning. Can you see the cards here? This is...
Yeah, I got to tell you something. I'm going to use a 2-word phrase of mine that I use a lot, that's become at the Magician's Forum. People laugh. I use it all the time. You know what it is? I say, "Listen, guys, you got to start reading the good stuff." So good stuff became a thing of mine. Yeah. Because people I see at these forums, they're talking about things, and I've written a trick that's so much better than the one I'm talking about. So that's what I say, "Hey, you got to start reading the good stuff. I've written these books just for you. Where the hell have you been?" You know?
Absolutely.
And I really mean it. You can't believe some of the things I hear younger, usually newbies, talking about that I've already written about, of course, you know. Now, which title is that?
This,
Without my glasses.
this is the famous
Oh, the
magic.
magic book.
Yes.
Okay. There's a, when you go to HarryLorayneMagic.com, near the top, there's a thing, it says Michael Vincent. You know that name, don't
Yes,
you?
I do. Mhm.
You click on that. I'm telling you, he brought me to tears. He starts to talk about the magic book. Well, he raves about it like it's the Bible.
Mhm.
I mean, so you just reminded me of it.
Yeah.
The magic book. And my son and daughter-in-law are going to reprint it. It's still out there. If you go to HarryLorayneMagic.com, you'll see you can still order copies if you want to, but they're going to do fresher, maybe hardcover versions of it. And they're getting, yeah, absolutely. That was the original picture we doing the catch of the magic book. And there's going to be a forward in it. I think, at least I think they're going to use it for that book or for close-up card magic from David Blaine, because he talks about it. If you go to one of those sites, again, HarryLorayneMagic.com, if you click on videos and you scroll down, there are videos of different people that couldn't make my 90th birthday party in person, which was held in New York. Like, for example, Paul Gordon flew in from England to be at my party and flew back the next morning.
Wow.
Jean-Jacques Sanvert did the same thing from Paris. There were people from India, from Japan, that came to the party, but a lot of people couldn't make the party. Mel Brooks, he's the picture you'll see on my website. Dick Cavett, they were doing other things. Alan Alda, to mention celebrities, but magicians, Penn and Teller.
David Regal, I saw.
Say that again.
David Regal, I saw he
David Regal, of course, but David Regal was at the party.
Oh,
he was there personally, and Penn and so many different people, but David Blaine was one of them, and he talked about how I really actually got him started in the magic, blah blah blah. And just the other day, my son and daughter-in-law said, "Can you get him to say something like that, so that we could use it as a forward for either the magic book or close-up card magic?" Because he doesn't say, David doesn't say on this video which book he's talking about. When he says, "You changed my life, blah, blah, blah," he doesn't say which book. So I wrote David, said, "I don't know which book you're talking about, but would you write what you said?" And he said, "Sure." He said, "It would be my honor." And that's David Blaine. So that's very nice. So that just happened yesterday. So we'll see.
Close-up card magic was the one that was recommended to me when I walked into my first magic shop. My first real magic shop was close-up card magic was the go-to. What was your experience, Harry, with close-up card magic, and did you expect it to become the standard that it now has?
I did not. I did. Oh, God. You know, it's amazing. That book, I have heard from it. I had, I moved a lot as I grew up, and you lose cartons when you move and things like that. I had cartons of letters because, again, remember, we're going back before email. I had cartons of letters. I'm talking as big as my desk, that got lost when I was moving. People raving about close-up card magic. People, and I've had that with the memory book also. I had one letter on my wall, which again got lost when I moved one time, from a guy saying I was going to commit suicide until I read your book, the memory book, and I decided it's not worth killing myself after I learned what I just did. I mean, things like that. Can you believe that? From these, thems, and those kid, as Johnny Carson said, from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So, you asked me about, somebody interviewed me, was it David Regal? Somebody said, "I'd like to know the genesis of close-up card magic." How did it happen? How did it start? What, did you ever write a magic book before? No. But I had written other books. The magic book came out in 1962. I had written the 2 books on memory for the public before that, one in 1956, one in 1961, which was still selling at that time. And maybe still, some of them still are. Okay, I'm up at Tannen's on a Saturday, and I guess it was bad weather or it was closing time. Jimmy Herpick, who works for Lou Tannen, is at the back of the counter, and he's doing card magic for a group of about 8 or 10 people who are the only people left in the store, except for me. I was there watching also. Lou Tannen sticks his head out from behind the curtain and he says, "Jim, I need you for a minute. Would you come back?" So Jimmy looks at me, says, "Harry, could you keep these people interested just for a couple of minutes while I talk to Lou?" I said, "Sure." I walk around to the back of the counter, pick up the deck and start doing card magic, my own stuff. Again, long story short, I do a bunch of things. I mean, maybe, I'm the kind of guy, I think I mentioned this to you before, that it's hard to start me, but harder to stop me. I'm going to go on and on. Anyway, it comes to the end, the people leave, they're applauding, they're amazed, and etc. They leave. What I didn't know was that Jimmy Herpick and Lou Tannen were watching me for the last, 15, 20 minutes doing card magic for these people. After they leave, Lou says to me, "Harry, can you teach some of the things I just saw you do?" I said, "Well, yeah, I think so. I've written 2 books for the public." He says, "Do a couple of," anyway, look, I do a couple of chapters. He says, "Please, Harry, write the whole darn book." And I do. That's the story of how it started. I'll tell you what, 2 things made it important, I think. This is an interesting story. The book comes out, Close-Up Card Magic by Harry Lorayne. There was a guy in Chicago by the name of Senator Crandall. He was not a senator. He was a bartender. I met him once. I went to the bar with dirty sawdust on the floor, etc. But the reason I mention it, he happened to be a name in magic. Why he was, I don't know, because you just shook your head. You heard his name. You know his name.
From the castle.
Okay, if that's what I didn't know. Okay. The book comes out, and I don't remember which was the most important magic magazine at that time. I think it was the Sphinx, was the magazine that most magicians, subscribe to. Excuse me. And growing old sucks. My nose didn't usually run this way. He sends a letter to the magazine, kind of a review of Close-Up Card Magic, and he says something like, I'm actually not doing the exact words, but I'm pretty close. He said, "Written by that fast-talking New Yorker, Harry Lorayne." What I think he meant, and you can delete this if you want to, I think he meant by that fast-talking Jewish New Yorker from Lower East Side. I'm pretty sure that's what he meant. Now, here's what happened. I read this and, my heart skips a beat. What? Now, one of my best friends at the time, I don't know how many young magicians know him now, was a gentleman by the name of Richard Himber. Richard Himber, right, was a very good friend. His business was music, of course, and he was very well known to the public, but he was into magic. He sees this damn letter from Senator Crandall, and he sends a reply to him via the Sphinx magazine. Now, he was Richard Himber, was the name at that time. The Sphinx is not going to turn it down, so they published a letter where he says, "What the heck are you talking about? Do you even know Harry Lorayne? Do you know how good he is, blah, blah, etc." And the idiot, Senator Crandall, answers Dick Himber. It goes back and forth a few times, which suddenly makes my name, or the name of the book anyway, known, because people are reading these silly letters, and they say, "Well, what is this about? Close-Up Card Magic, what the hell is that?" It helps make the name known. That was one thing that helped make the name known. And the second thing, Lou Tannen gets a letter from a guy that says, "I have purchased Close-Up Card Magic by Harry Lorayne. And I want to say that I would like to build a cathedral where Harry Lorayne walks for out of this universe.
Oh.
That's what he says as one sentence in his letter.
Oh.
And I'm quoting it pretty closely. I'd like to build a cathedral where Harry Lorayne walks out of his universe. Now, why am I telling you this? Lieutenant started to show a picture of that letter with that sentence circled or made bold so everybody could read it in all his ads. And that sold the hell. And the book, you know, I got to tell you something. And I've said this so many times, Armando. I didn't know that I was writing a classic. I would have made a much different deal. I got 10% royalty for 2 years. That's it.
Wow. Wow.
So I would have made a royalty for 50 years because it's been selling for that long. It still is. My son and daughter going to republish it.
Okay.
Like I told you, with maybe David Blaine's forward.
That would be
People
great.
have raved. People told me, and I always say this as a joke. People said, "You put me into magic with that book," and I always say, "Look, I don't want to accept the credit or the blame." You know, so I always say it as a joke, but that's what I've been getting all over the world from people. And there are people have written things about the magic book. You know, the magic book is very interesting. I wrote that for the public. Yeah, I didn't write it for magicians. You know how that came about? One publisher by the name of Stein and Day. Mm-hmm. They're out of business now. Saul Stein and his wife Patricia Day formed this publishing company, Stein and Day. They published 2 books of mine, the memory book and my second book, Secrets of Mind Power, 2 very strong books. But, and I want to be careful about this, I got a feeling that I was not happy with the royalties I was getting, blah, blah, blah. So again, long story short, I didn't want to do another book for them. So I went to my literary agent, who was a guy by the name of Owen Laster, who died many years ago, but he was the head of the literary agency of William Morris Agency, which is one of the biggest theatrical agency, or was at that time, of theatrical people at that time. And I say to Owen, how can I get away? Because he was a literary agent. He knew about these things. I said, how can I get away if I want to write another book? How can I get away from Stein? Because there was a clause at the top of every publishing contract in those days, probably still is, that said that the publisher got first choice for your next book. That was a standard on every publishing contract. And that's why if I wanted to do another book, Stein and Day had first choice. So Owen Laster says to me, Harry, there's only one way. There's only one way to get out of that. You've got to do a book that I'll put up for auction, which is the way they did it in those days. You know what that means, right? People, publishers offering money for the rights to the book. He said, I'll do an auction, and we got to hope that somebody outbids Stein and Day. That's the only way, where Stein and Day backs off and say, no, I don't want to pay more than $100,000 or whatever. That once they back out, you could tell the person that bid the highest before that, do the book for that person. So that's what he does. He starts an auction. And everybody, publishers start to do it, and it's very flattering, etc. End of story. Stein and Day backs out. I forget the number. It was a very high number, maybe 100,000. I don't know. I'm up at Owen Laster's office, and we're very happy. Stein and Day backed out. I can now write a book for another publisher. Owen Laster says to me, there's only one problem. I say, what? He says, you got to write a damn book. I didn't have a book in mind. All I had in mind was to get away from Stein and Day. Well, that became the magic book. He said, Harry, there are no decent books for non-magicians, but for people who would like to be interested in magic. And he was right. I saw some of them. They were awful. You know, books about using nails or screws or handkerchiefs or ropes. I would do a book on card magic, but he said, you got to put other stuff in there. That's why, if you know the magic book, I got tricks to handkerchiefs with numbers, with ropes, but they're impromptu. I'm an impromptu guy. I never walked around with things in my pocket. That's another thing you might want to talk about, which is a whole other point, where I never carry my own deck. So you can remind me about that later if you want to stop me, which you may want to do
No.
right now. So anyway, that became the magic book, which I wrote to the public. But you know what's interesting? There are things on the Magic Cafe, people raving about it, saying that it's one of the best books they ever read in magic. And I wrote it to beginners, and these are, experienced magicians who tell me it's one of the greatest books they ever read. Well, that's nice, flattering, etc. So that's the story about the magic book.
Going back to close-up card magic, Harry, one of my favorite things about that is the introduction, or not the introduction, but how you begin the advice for performing card magic. Because in the close-up card magic, if I'm not mistaken, you give some very good advice on performing card magic. And I think it's making it entertaining. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I think what you're talking about is presentation.
Yes, there.
Yeah, I did that without thinking. I think that helped make it a classic, because I don't think anybody was doing that at that point. And I didn't think about it specifically. I just read, that's the way I did card magic. Your presentation is important. In recent years, let's say for my last 10 books, or maybe 8 or 7 books, I always said this at one point in the book, or in a few points in the book. I said, I want you to use your 3 Ps. And that became another cliche of mine, the 3 Ps. I said, you learn the trick, obviously, but then you've got to introduce your 3 Ps. What do I mean? Your patter, your presentation, your personality. That became very important, because that is important. You can't, I never imitated, when I began, if I imitated somebody, I realized that was wrong. Do me, my personality. And that's what I was telling magicians, new ones, I guess, who are reading my books. I said, put those 3, and I still do that. It's in my last book. It's in the book before my last, the book before that. Learn the trick the way I teach it, obviously. Then, you want to make changes? That's up to you. I suggest you don't, because I've worked with these tricks for decades. I've taken out all the bad things. I know from experience, I've done them all over the world, for God's sakes. But if you want to change them, fine. But more important, what you got to do is put the 3 Ps in there. And then I tell them about the pattern, personality, presentation, which to me is very important. So I think I touched on that in close-up card magic, except I didn't come up with the 3 P sentence yet. But that's what I was talking about. It's very important that you do your own personality. Otherwise, and I'll tell you something else. When I did my memory act all over the world for 20 years with my wife. We traveled all over the world. After that, I did it by myself, because I laugh at this, but at the time it wasn't funny. But driving home from a show we did, she didn't do any memory. She wrote on the blackboard while I was doing things. I did a giant card thing. She put the cards on a blackboard for me in correct order, things like that. She introduced me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, blah, 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 blah. One day we're driving home from a show. It's after 20 years. She says, hon, I say, yeah. She says, I don't think that I ever want to say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, again.
Wow.
She never did. Wow. She said, it's time we had a child, which we did. My son just celebrated his 53rd birthday. I can't believe it. Yeah, that's Robert. But that's what happened after 20 years. It ended up a good thing for me, because when I was working with Renee, there were 2 things I did that used blackboards. One was called the objects in hiding places, numbered from 1 to 50 that people would call out. I told them, make it as silly as you want. Not telling the people that the sillier or more ridiculous it was, the easier it was for me to remember. So, and that I was able to get laughs. and I'm going to tell you what I laughs why I'm telling you this story. They would call out things like number 15, so and so hidden and so and so. And what Renee did, she'd write about the blackboard at the top of the call. And I would get laughs on it. I'll give you one example, and this is true. Somebody once called number 15, Elizabeth Taylor, hidden under my bed. And while Renee was writing it, I'd say, that's not ridiculous. That's wishful thinking. And I got a big laugh. Yeah, I'm not a good joke teller, but I'm a pretty good ad lib. At least I was, comedian. That was one of the reasons I used that, aside from remembering it, is to get laughs. And then with the card thing, she would take giant cards that somebody called, put them in a blackboard, etc. Okay, now I'm telling you this for a reason, and my great memory forgot the reason. What were we talking about? Why am I telling you this? Oh, I know why. We're talking about other people imitating people. I used to see when I was doing the act, so often somebody sitting, not in the very front, but in the second or third row with a legal pad and pen, looking at my mouth, writing. They're taking down every word I say. I had people, since my first book came out, and I started to do these things on stage and on television, but mostly on stage, doing a 45-minute to 1 hour act. I can't tell you how many people copied my act. I mean, word for word. They can do the memory. I'm teaching that in a book, for God's sakes. So that was not the problem. They wanted to go up and demonstrate it as I did. But you know what the end of the story is? They all put people to sleep. Oh. That's the thing. They didn't last at all. Because, you know, I've written this and I've said it so often, Armando. In magic and memory, those are my two highlights. Those are my two things I do best, the two things in my life, magic and memory. But basically, they are my entertainment media. I use them for entertainment. I've said this so often, I don't care if you flap your arms like this and fly around the room. If you don't entertain people, you're going to put them to sleep. And that's the point. People imitating people who are good, they're not going to be that good, even if they use exactly the same words. That was my point. Wow. You know, about imitators and about people watching a musician do a card trick and doing it exactly the same way. That ain't good. That's not your three P's. See, that's the point. So I don't know if I told you more than you wanted to know about.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Martin Nash, you know, in my very first issue of Apocalypse, where I talked about news or things like that, there was a little box because I thought this was important and I was very proud of it.
Do you mind tilting the camera down a little bit, Harry? Just tilting so I can see your face a little bit more. There we are. Perfect. Beautiful.
I thought you didn't want to see my face.
We do. A little bit up now. Just you went a little bit. There we are.
I had a box on the second or third page of the first issue I did of Apocalypse about Martin Nash. And I told this story, which I thought was a little interesting at the time. No big deal. Martin Nash was with his wife or friend somewhere where I was, and I was doing either a lecture or I was just doing card magic for a group of people. And Martin Nash walked over there. This is what he told me afterwards. He walked over to watch. Then he came back and he said to his wife or friend, I forget which, he said, you know what? I just saw a life-changing thing. I just realized that, yes, you can make a living doing card magic. And he said that after watching me work, which is very flattering. And that's what I put in Apocalypse in the very first issue of Apocalypse. You know, Apocalypse was very, you know, I wrote Apocalypse 1977, I think. You know, so many years ago, I forget the years. But it started for 1 year with Richard Kaufman, then he left to do something else. And I was going to drop it, but people started to scream at me. They said, oh no, Harry, continue with it. It was the busiest time of my life. I was traveling all over the world working, making a lot of money. You know, I can brag now because it's not happening now. So people say you can't brag. Tell them, at my age, I can do it. At my age, right, I can do whatever I want.
Absolutely.
The last years of my professional life when I was working, listen to this, anything west of the Mississippi, I was living in New York, anything west of the Mississippi, any appearance that I made, listen to this, my fee was $15,000 plus all expenses, meaning travel and hotel. Wow. East of the Mississippi, because I lived east of the Mississippi, it was $12,500 plus all expenses. That's what I was earning. So I'm knocking wood mentally. I did pretty well. Mostly I was doing stage appearances by myself. I started to tell you before, and I don't think I finished it, when Renee said, I don't want to say good evening, ladies and gentlemen anymore. She didn't want to do the act anymore with me. I felt bad at first, but then it turned out, you know, I once wrote an article 100 years ago where bad things become good. Like a bad thing was I got typhoid fever in the Army from drinking stagnant water. And while I was in the hospital, Company E of the 192nd Battalion went overseas, and none of them came back. So the bad thing was me having typhoid fever. There's nothing good about that, but it saved my life because I didn't go overseas with my company. So that was the first article in this thing I wrote, which I can't find. I forget who I wrote it for, all those decades ago. So I was writing. Now again, you got to remind me, why am I telling you that? It started with a reason.
Well, we were discussing the Lorraine Forrest and Martin Nash prior to this, but if you
and we were talking about Apocalypse.
Yes.
And
it's Kaufman left.
Say again.
Kaufman had left. You started with Kaufman as the editor.
Yeah. I started to do it, and I was gonna stop. And like I said, it was the busiest time of my life. That's why I gave you the prices just now. I'm not about to turn down an offer of $15,000, you know, in order to write Apocalypse for magicians. I mean, come on, I love magicians. I got to draw the line somewhere. So anyway, it was the busiest time of my life. So many nights I didn't sleep. You know, in those days, again, there was no computer. I was using a Royal typewriter. Every trick that somebody sent to me, I rewrote. Then I had to, you know why? Again, I'm going to brag a little, because I taught it better than they did. So when I got a trick, the guy got full credit, but I taught it. I wrote it up in Apocalypse, and I typed it on this Royal typewriter with keys like that, typing in the middle of the night, you know. And in those days, it was paste. What was it called? Copy and paste or something like that, where I would type it and paste it on sheets that I bought, like graphic lines, and I would bring it to a printer. And this was at the busiest time of my life. Then I had to carry it to the printer and then mail it. I finally got somebody that would mail out every month my American subscribers, which were thousands of people all over the country, but I couldn't find somebody that would mail out my out of USA. I had to schlep those to the post office.
Wow.
I get so emotional.
It must be, I was just going to ask you, this must be a difficult question for you, Harry, having written so many books, 53 now, but do you have a favorite magic book? Is it the close-up card magic? Is it the magic book? It must be.
You know how I used to answer that question?
Yeah.
And you know, I said it maybe half facetiously, but I meant it. Somebody asked me that question, what's your favorite book? I would mention the name of the book, my latest book, the one that just came out. You know what? That was usually the case.
Yes.
Because I usually felt that way. I just wrote current new stuff. So when somebody said, what's your favorite book? That would be the first thing that came to mind. So like I say, I probably said it half facetiously with a smile, but I kind of really meant it. The current book, the last book I wrote, was my favorite book. And also, I got to be honest with you, I'm a pretty good salesman. I wanted to sell the book that was currently out, you know.
Yes, of course.
So, you know, I admit those things. I am a good salesman. I always was. And that's, you know, God gave me things that, things I told you, like I'm a good editor. How does a guy with half the time of high school become a good editor?
Mhm.
You know, uh, amazing. People ask me now. Uh, Somebody just recently, I don't know why they wrote it. Oh, I was talking how to remember names and faces, and I gave them the right to write something about it. And I said, if you look at a person's face after you've made the name meaningful in your mind, you've got to pick out an outstanding feature, and you may want to pick out his larger than a lamp nose.
Mhm.
They wrote larger than a lamp nose. But I know that I made up lamp, I forget what I used, larger than a bottle nose. When you write something like that, the larger than a bottle has to be hyphenated.
Mhm.
Why? Because that's an adjective. It's more than one word, but it's a description. You're describing a nose, larger than a bottle. The person I said it to said, well, why, Harry? It's larger than a bottle nose. I said, I'm telling you why. It's an adjective.
Mhm.
And it's all really one, if it was one word, larger than a bottle, it's got to be hyphenated. And you know something? I'm right. I know what I'm talking about. Don't ask me why, but I know these things.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of thing I don't know how I know them, but I
Mhm.
know them.
Mhm.
I'm part of the things that I was told since I was a child, going to early grades of school, is that dyslexia affects your spelling.
Mhm.
I am a much better speller than most people. I can spell words like diarrhea and hemorrhoid. I mean, I'm talking about words that most people can't spell.
Yeah.
Now, you ask me why? I don't know,
Mhm.
but I'm a very good speller. There were some things that, here's a funny thing that just came to mind, and I just told it to somebody recently. There are a few words that give me a problem.
Mhm.
I had a problem with the word necessary.
Mhm.
And when I was telling it to somebody, they asked me, well, Harry, you are the Yoda of memory training. How did you remember to get it right? I said simply, very simply, I said it's necessary and CESS in the middle, because they're not, it spells assessment. I said it's necessary to use a cesspool to clean things. Once I got cess in my mind, outstanding. A very simple example is I said I before E became a problem for people. And one of the words was believe.
Mhm.
Is it BELIE or EI? I wrote on a piece of paper BE, then in big letters, never believe a lie. LIEVE. That's how you remember that it's LIE, not EI. Of course, you know how to spell lie.
Mhm.
Put that in the middle, big letters, you got it.
Mhm.
One of the words I had a lot of problems with, don't ask me why, was the word rhythm that I
Mhm.
use a lot. There's rhythm to my writing,
Mhm.
etc. Every time I came to it, I had to look it up in the dictionary until I said, come on, Harry, Mr. Memory Expert. And I came up with a phrase, right? Red hot, you two-headed monster.
Mhm.
That's what came to mind. I got to do red hot, you two-headed monster, RHM. Got it. So, I applied my systems on different things
Mhm.
all over the world,
Mhm.
in
So,
any area.
mhm.
I'm good. Maybe I shouldn't talk about this. One of the ways I made a lot of money
Mhm.
was big companies, corporations,
Mhm.
pay me a lot of money
Mhm.
to go to a meeting where when people came in, they were searched to make sure they didn't have a recording device hidden in their pockets anywhere,
Mhm.
because there were going to be things spoken about at that meeting that the company didn't want anyone to know except the people that were invited there, the
Mhm.
companies that were invited there. I was paid a lot of money by big companies
Mhm.
to go there and remember everything that was,
Oh, wow.
all
Incredible.
the important things that were mentioned at this meeting, where they didn't want any recordings made of it.
Wow.
Well, with me, you didn't need recordings. The recording was there.
They brought the
So,
Yoda of memory. That's I didn't
yeah,
know. Wow. Wow.
so I could write a book.
That's incredible. I know a lot of the memory book is association. Association is a word you use quite a bit.
All memory is based on association. based on a few things. The basic thing is association. It's based on the reminder principle.
Mhm.
You know, people go through life saying, oh, snap their fingers. That reminds me. That's a thing everybody that reminds me. Well, why not instead of why not use that reminder principle to help you not forget?
Mhm.
You know, people keep saying they forget. And I wrote about this too. I say, you didn't forget. What you did is you didn't remember it in the first place.
Mhm.
And I also write in this, if you go to harrylorayne.com, one of those sites I told you before, you'll see all these pictures. And one of the things that I say on it, with their quotes by me, etc., is, you know, we are all born with great memories.
Mhm.
The problem is you've allowed your memory to lie dormant most of your life. I will wake it up for you. I will teach you how to wake up that great memory that you've got anyway. And you know, that's true. People do. Otherwise, how would it be all the people in the world that tell me how I saved their lives, that now they can remember anything, who before that couldn't remember anything?
Mhm.
So the truth is, they did have great memories. I taught them how to use it. That's the point.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Harry, you've been very generous with your time. I'm very grateful for this.
Oh, I'm going to send you a bill.
Yeah. One last question. I know you touched about the three P's, but what makes a good magician? What makes a great magician, in your opinion? What is it?
You know, there's only one word that comes to mind, the only one, and I've said it before, and that is entertainment.
Mm,
You know, I told you before, I don't care what you're doing. I told you, I don't care if you fly around the room. When you say what makes a good magician, I don't care if you do the greatest trick in the world.
mhm.
Listen, I'll give you an example of an old friend of mine. Ed Marlo was
Yes.
a good friend of mine.
Wow.
And every time I was in Chicago, where he lived, I would go to where the magicians had a meeting every Saturday, and Ed Marlo was always there. And a lot of times, I would do a trick, and a month or two later, I would see in the magazine tricks by Ed Marlo. Ed Marlo was a phase writer, PHASE. He'd
Mhm.
write a trick, phase one, phase two, phase three. And usually one of the phases was a trick I had shown him. And then I started to realize he was a very nice guy. And I'll tell you why I brought him up in a minute. But first, let me finish this thought about him having something of mine in a magazine under his name. I realized that Ed Marlowe was the kind of guy, if you fooled him, and if he came up with a way to do that particular trick himself, he thought he had the right to publish it under his name.
Mm,
So the problem that I started to realize is I don't want to fool him. If I fool him, he'll write it, damn it, in his name. So how do I know when he's fooled? This is funny. He used to have a cigar in his mouth. He was a cigar smoker for a long time, but then health-wise, he was told he couldn't smoke anymore. So he had an unlit cigar straight out of his mouth, in the center of his mouth, all the time. And I realized in those days I had good peripheral vision. When I did a trick, and if I saw the cigar wiggle like that, I knew I fooled him. Are you ready for that?
mhm.
I know I fooled him. Really, I'm not making that up. The cigar wiggled.
Oh,
I fooled him. So
oh,
then I would say, Ed, it's easy. You need 5 blacks and 3 reds. In other words, I would teach him the trick. And it never, ever appeared under his name in the book.
mm,
But the reason I'm talking about Ed Marlowe, who was one of the best sleight of hand men I ever met,
mm,
I would watch him do magic for lay people, not magicians,
mhm,
lay people, and he would lose them. He
mm,
wouldn't entertain them. You know why? He got involved with his own sleight of hand. He
mm,
started to look down at what he was doing terrifically, but
mhm,
not paying attention to his audience. In other words, not entertaining him.
mm,
So when you ask me, what is the most important part of magic, whether it's card magic, rope magic, toothpick magic, or magnet magic, entertainment.
mm.
And that's what a lot of magicians don't know. I've seen terrible magicians get paid a lot of money for appearance because they were good entertainers.
Mhm,
That's you are being booked to entertain.
mhm,
Yeah, you think you're being booked to do magic, and the people that are booking you think they're booking you to do magic. but both of you don't realize that you're being booked to entertain. That's the key. And I'm telling you, most magicians don't realize that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Well, it's been a wonderful, incredible session, Harry. Is there anything other advice that I haven't asked about that you may want to share on this?
Nah, not really. I can't think of anything, Anyway, I think I've bored you enough.
No, I mean, I could listen to, did you ever?
Sorry, you have another question?
Oh, Simon Aronson, the late Simon Aronson. Did you ever meet Simon Aronson?
I know, he died. I met him in Chicago. He was always there on these Saturdays that I told you that I went where Ed Marlo was there, Simon Aronson, a couple other known names that I can't think of at the moment. The same people. It's like when I used to go when I was in New York. I would go to the Saturday. They called it the cafeteria. We would meet at the cafeteria. No matter what it was called the cafeteria, that we would go to meet after 10 and it's closed at 3 p.m. So we'd all meet. And the cafeteria loved us. They gave us a section in the back because we all ordered stuff, mostly coffee and things like that. But a lot of people had their dinner there, things like that. So the cafeteria gave us a section in the corner of their rear room somewhere.
Wow.
So, those were the good old days, boy.
From Close-Up Card Magic, sorry to keep you a little bit longer here, but just, Harry, from Close-Up Card Magic, do you have a favorite effect in that book, or do you have top 3 favorite effects in Close-Up?
Well, the favorite book, the one that became mostly known is Out of This Universe.
Out of This Universe.
I told you that somebody wrote they want to build a cathedral because of that trick. You know something, and I'll end by telling you this. Paul Curry, who invented Out of This World, was a good friend. We were very good friends. And one day I did Out of This Universe for him, and he said, "Harry, you fooled the SH out of me." And I did. I fooled the heck out of a guy that invented Out of This World, but this was Out of This Universe. And I mentioned my websites before. Let me close with this. If you go, I think it's harrylorayne.magic.com. Maybe it's the other one also. I swear they all blend in my mind because my daughter-in-law is putting it together. Does a wonderful job. So I'm not sure exactly about everything. But on one of them, I think it's harrylorayne.magic.com. If you click on performances, I think, and you go all the way, scroll down to the bottom where you'll see Mel Brooks' picture on the video where I did it at my birthday party, etc. There's a paragraph there. And in the center of the paragraph is the word YouTube underlined. If you click on that, about 34 or 35 videos come on screen of me performing card stuff from my best ever 4-volume DVD set. So you can click on any one of those and see me performing it. And these are things that I perform and teach on that. And again, I'll close with this. I'm sorry?
Rock and Roll Aces is a fooler. I mean, that's one of my...
Oh, yeah, that's one of them that I do there, sure. Oh, there's so many good tag along aces. What a fooler. This is interesting, and I wrote this just recently on a magic forum. I watched some of those because I said tag along aces. I watched that. Armando, I fooled myself. I don't remember what I did. I'm serious. I said, oh my God, that's a wonderful trick. I don't remember how it's done.
Yes.
I'm pretty good. At least I was in those days. I didn't see any moves or anything. I fooled the heck out of myself out of a lot of those things. So there's some very good things there. And the last thing I'm going to tell you about the title, Best Ever. Whenever I write it, I put it in quotes. And I'm going to tell you why. I always say this. I say, I admit that I'm stupid, but I'm not that stupid. I would never, ever title one of my things the best ever. Never. I'm not that stupid. Louis Fillonga, I hope I haven't told you this before. I hope I'm not being repetition. Louis Fillonga, may rest in peace. He was the head of L&L Publishing, was a good friend. He died a while ago. He titled it, because he would sit in the audience and say, Harry, about that trick I once saw you do, the blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, those days I remembered all these tricks. There were about 135, 150 tricks on that 4-volume set that I perform and teach. Okay, he titled it Best Ever.
Mhm.
Harry Lorayne's Best Ever DVD set, or just Best Ever, not Harry Lorayne's, because that would have a different meaning. If he said Harry Lorayne's Best Ever,
Mhm.
that's okay. He said, it's, in my opinion, these are my best ever tricks. So
Mhm.
he didn't call it that. He said Best Ever.
Mm.
Okay. I
Mhm.
said, no. We argued about that. I said, and I told him why. I said, Louis, I don't want people to think that I'm bragging,
Mhm.
that calling them my best. He said, Harry, I don't care what you think. These are the best ever tricks and the best ever teaching of those tricks I ever saw. And that's going to be their title. And that's what happened, which is why I always, you can check it out. You'll never find me saying best ever without putting quotes around them, those two words, because I want people to know I didn't make up that title. I'm not that stupid.
Well, I think they are the best ever, Harry. It's been just an incredible honor and a pleasure, Harry. Thank you so much. And boy, it's you're very generous. Thank you, Harry.
My pleasure. I hope you show this to other people,
Yes.
so maybe they'll go to my websites. And as I said before, much more important than ordering. You want to order, hey, that's great.
Mhm.
But I think you'll be entertained.
Harry,
Yes.